Welcome back to another episode of TrueNAS Tech Talk. As promised, we're going to talk about the status of VMs and containers in TrueNAS this week. We'll do a little bit about the new fast dedupe functionality that's coming to 2504, and we'll talk about a couple of different trends we're seeing in the app catalog. But for now, let's jump right into it here, Chris. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about VMs and containers in TrueNAS, especially as they relate to our latest update here. So
we did tease it last week, so I suppose we got to, but no, this is good. It's a good conversation to have. So let's get into it. As folks maybe have known by the time they're watching this, there's a forum post which has gone live, kind of detailing some of the decisions and what's going on in the background behind the scenes with VMs and containers. But let's talk first about the whole experimental status, Chris, and kind of what didn't go so well and what we learned from that, because that was an interesting exercise in this Fangtooth release.
definitely, we definitely saw a lot of, we'll say again, spirited feedback and interesting commentary come from some of those of you. We do appreciate it all. Don't worry. We got thick skin. We can take it.
We can also be friends at the end of the day. It's fine.
Exactly. We understand. We introduced some really neat new functionality as far as with the LXCs in there, and there was even some really good things in the VM functionality that was using Incus as the management there. But the challenge was that this suddenly became something that was marked as experimental.
Mhm.
So those of our users who were on 24.10, they were very used to the existing infrastructure framework that was there for the virtualization tab, said, hey, why is this functionality suddenly becoming experimental now?
Yeah.
Maybe they were relying on it before.
Yeah, and that's kind of some short-sightedness on our part because we tend to look at things with a little bit of tunnel vision. We look at what's supported on the enterprise side, and that's really what we consider kind of the core baked functionality that gets treated differently in TrueNAS. But then, of course, now we have folks in the community using VMs for many years, even though it's never been an enterprise thing for us. It's always been something we've treated as experimental internally, just never called it that. And because of that kind of distinction on how we looked at it for the enterprise versus the community, that led us to making probably not the best decision on Fangtooth to go and, kind of rototill that section and then label as experimental. And of course, it caused some churn for some folks, which we've heard from you. Believe me, we've heard from you. It was good feedback, and we had some lessons to be learned from that.
Yeah. So going forward, Chris, the idea is that in our future releases, we're going to try to avoid merging some of these more experimental edge features, at least in our major releases. Is that
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's right. And in general, we're going to have to also start leveling up and evolving how we do our nightly images as well. So for those who've been around a long time, maybe you know the history of, FreeNAS, an open source project. And, especially in those early years, it was very organic. And I mean that in both the best and worst sense of the word, where things just, oh, somebody has an idea. Here's a patch. Let's merge it. There was a lot of YOLO in those early days. And now that we've reached kind of a different stage of the product maturity, obviously we're going to have to change a little bit about how we bring features in coming forward and just assume everything's got to be production on day one. We can't quite get away with the, hey, it's a community open source thing, so we're going to treat certain features as more community open source. Things have to be kind of baked the moment they arrive, which means things like the nightly, for example, instead of merging things in that are kind of half implemented and half baked and we'll get it done by the fall. No, we need to do things like feature branches now, or over time, it's going to be like that feature doesn't merge till it's already passed all its general quality tests and is like ready to go and ready to be tested and used, and not maturing kind of in flight like a lot of open source projects do.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the goal we're looking forward for is like, let's talk about the 2510 release, which is our fall release, Gold Eye. So the goal here is that we're going to aim for that enterprise readiness for all of the virtualization workloads on
Mm,
TrueNAS. So, I mean,
yeah.
Incus was a great first step. It was building on, a fantastic set of open source tooling, but there were definitely some challenges as far as its integration in with
Yeah.
TrueNAS. Like, Incus wanted to completely own its own data sets. A lot of users mentioned they lost the ability to do internal snapshots and backups through the TrueNAS UI. So there were challenges like that. They said, hey, it feels like it's kind of a little bit disconnected from the rest of the TrueNAS middleware.
It is. It is kind of in a silos. One of the things we discovered pretty early on as we're going and doing the integration work, because integration to us means it has to be able to play nicely with all the other TrueNAS functionality. So again, snapshot tasks, replication tasks, even the ability to say, hey, I have a ZVol. I'd like to also now expose that over iSCSI, because that's a valid thing. You may have an external hypervisor and you want to switch from hosting it locally on the TrueNAS to now I'd like to farm that out, so to speak, to a compute node. And when you do that with Incus, which kind of has a walled garden with how it does its internal management for all valid reasons, no criticism of Incus at all, but that makes it just tough to integrate fully into TrueNAS in the way we would like to see it to be considered enterprise ready. So yeah, definitely a lot of interesting technical challenges, which we've seen over the last 6 to 9 months.
Yeah. So I mean, ultimately, let's kind of rip this band-aid off here a bit, Chris. So the real truth is that in 25.10 and 25.04.2, we are going
Mm-hmm.
to be re-enabling that virtualization tab in the UI.
Correct. And this is the libvirt back thing, which at the end of the day, before people who maybe aren't as up to speed on virtualization on Linux worry, no, we're not changing hypervisors, anything like that. They both use QEMU, KVM, all that good stuff in the back end. This is more just infrastructure bits and how we enable it, how we integrate with our own API or middleware, and then expose that to the UI. So we'll be re-enabling that VMs tab. The code never really got removed. It's always been sitting there, just kind of hidden out of sight. But we've heard pretty loud and clear from our community. A lot of folks, again, rely on that feature a lot more extensively than even we thought when we did the Fangtooth release. So we're going to re-enable that so folks who do want to move forward from Electric Eel to Fangtooth can do that and still keep their same VM functionality and not have to migrate it into Incus. While in the background, we're working on enterprise readiness for the fall release and being able to, fully flesh it out.
Yeah, and for those of you who did do the migration and you've migrated all of your pieces over to the Incus-based VMs and your instances, we're not going to change that on you. There's going to be a migration path to libvirt-powered VMs again that we can provide in that Goldeye release.
Yep.
That's not going to be in the .2 of Fangtooth. So Fangtooth is just going to add that tab back in. If you want to do a manual migration back from the instances back to virtualization, you're able to do that.
Yeah,
But
you have those choices. And again, by the fall release, we hope to have them all unified on one path again. And that's going to be important because, again, at that point, we take the experimental label off and can now evolve it slowly, steadily, and in a little bit different manner than we've typically done in the past.
Yeah. This is going to require a bit of, hard work from our side, though, Chris. I mean, there were
Oh, yeah.
some things that the Incus piece did do better
Mm-hmm.
than libvirt. And, some people were saying, hey, it makes, TPM and
Yeah.
secure boot VMs capable. Just means we're going to have to do some of the hard work in the back end to bring those functionalities into that, the virtualization tab through the
Absolutely.
libvirt capabilities.
Yeah,
It,
TPM is a good example. Another one was people have asked for a long time for native VNC support. We had that provided with Incus, and we did that on the Incus side. Ironically, it didn't even want to provide that. It was Spice only, and that's like the only thing it natively supports. But we'll make sure to include that again in the virtualizations tabs as well, and give people kind of the client protocol they want to be able to reach their remote desktops.
Exactly. So the idea is we're trying to give you some of this, but the best of both worlds here. Like we said, it's going to require some work on our end, but it is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the VM side covered. So what about the containers? Because I have seen a
Yeah.
lot of people who seem they're maybe not as thrilled with the VM status, but boy, they love the ability to
Yeah.
run the Linux containers in Incus. So
Absolutely, having more of that kind of full Linux stack where it's not quite so Docker like, and you can go and run your full Debian and all that good stuff. That makes a
I've
lot of sense. That will remain experimental through the fall release as we, again, tackle one thing at a time. The 6 month cadence means we can only kind of grab so much in each major release. And that one we're going to push off a little longer to take time and really bake it fully before we take the experimental label off of that. So in the meantime, keep using them, and then you'll see what comes in the April release of 2026.
Excellent. Well, I hope that satisfies sort of the questions and the curiosity. As Kris mentioned, there is a thread on our forums. We're going to link it again in the description of the video if you're watching this on YouTube. Please go there and continue the spirited discussion, as Kris and I, I'm sure, will be in there listening to your feedback.
Oh yeah, that should be interesting. Looking forward to seeing it. I'm sure we're already seeing it by the time you're watching this.
Most likely. Alrighty. Well, our next topic is we're going to talk a little bit about fast dedupe. So we actually had a little bit of a reunion there, Kris. You and Allan Jude, the
Yeah,
co-hosters of the BSD Now podcast, you
yeah.
actually had a little reunion.
We were talking about that. It had been something like 12, 13 years since we had done the show, and we were both there. And the funny thing was, we still have the exact same Rode Podcaster microphones. So if you're a listener of the old show, you might recognize that and go, those. Well, first of all, those things are freaking metal and weigh about 50 pounds. They're indestructible. I could run them over with my car, and I'm actually thinking I'm going to get it gold plated and then put it in the will for my children or something, because it's got at least another 300 years of life in it. Fantastic microphone. But anyway, all that to say, it was great to get reunited with Allan again, and we got a chance to talk about some ZFS stuff, talk about fast dedupe specifically. There's still a lot of kind of mystification around this. What does it do? What does it provide? What changed? Where does it make sense to use? And so it was a pretty good conversation. Again, depends on your technical depth. We tried to keep it high enough level that most folks could get something from it, but it was still a lot of good questions too we got to answer.
Exactly. Yeah. So that should be up online. We'll put a link again in the video description for those who want to go there and watch the recording. But just let's do a quick little recap, maybe for those who didn't get a chance to watch through it. So I mean, fast dedupe it's an amazing improvement in technology. We've talked a little bit about it on the podcast before, and we've written some good blogs that are up all on our TrueNAS.com/blog.
Yeah.
But it's important to understand a couple critical things about it. It's fast dedupe. It's not magic dedupe. It won't automatically be able to make all of your data suddenly dedupable, and you're going to save piles of space in the process. It works a lot like compression in that sense. If you were storing all video files that are already very compressed, then you're not going to get a real win from compression. You're not going to be able to magically make those things smaller. But if you do have things that are like truly duplicate files, people are copying things from, folder A to folder B, or they're writing the same file from outside into there, then
Mm-hmm.
it can be, a massive win.
Oh yeah.
And now you do have the opportunity to sort of expand that use case where before you said, hey, maybe my data dedupes, but there was a bit of a performance tax to it, and I didn't want to pay that one. Well, now with fast dedupe, that cost is significantly less.
Well, significantly less, and a lot of the rough edges of the old dedupe implementation have been kind of sanded off. In particular, the whole performance cliff. We talked a bit about that in the webinar yesterday. That was one of the things, if you're going to go use a technology and turn something on, be it compression, fast dedupe, what you can't have is instability. You need consistency of performance. It can't be, it works great for, 60% of the lifetime of the data, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're down to, a fraction of the performance you had before. So fast dedupe, some of the work that went into it with having quotas on how much dedupe can be done in RAM, and then the ability to prune and evict blocks which have not been deduped. So blocks that are less likely to be deduped does that based on the age. So it can look at them and say, okay, this block's been in here for a while. It hasn't found any matches. It's not being currently deduped. The likelihood of it finding a match in the future is low. I'm going to kick that one out and make room for the new things, right? Which have a higher probability of being deduped. But as we mentioned earlier, Kris, again, it's not magic technology. So there is no real magic technology except for the RAM doubler. I hear that's really amazing. You install it and you just get free RAM. So apparently
That's
there is some magic, but
you just
yeah,
have to download more RAM, Kris.
you
We've
just
been doing
download
that
more
for years.
RAM,
Download
plug it
more
into the
RAM.
internet.
Yep.
But no, at the end of the day, there's actual technology and there's always a cost, right? There's a performance cost. You're doing more work effectively to gain this capability because you're having to scan and monitor all the blocks as they come in, check for matches, do all the sorting and keeping track of the dedupe tables in memory. Again, so there's a little bit of a performance hit, but nowhere near like it was back in the old days, the old dedupe. The new system's far more efficient. And but again, as you mentioned to earlier, Kris, it depends on your workload entirely. Again, because it's not magic. If you're not throwing dedupable blocks at it and you flip it on, then you're not going to see any real benefit. So
Yeah.
you have to know what you're doing before you go enable it to see if it's going to make sense for you. But we should
Exactly.
talk about some of those use cases, Chris. Like in what I think virtualization is the obvious one. Everyone assumes, oh, I have virtual desktops. I'm going to clone, 100 Windows
Yeah,
VMs. That
exactly.
makes
I
sense.
got 100 installed copies of Windows here. Surely they'll dedupe. And as long as you have, aligned blocks, which is a challenge with deduplication, you have to basically make sure, those Windows is writing those same files at sort of the same offsets, because if you shift them too far one way or another, suddenly it says, well, your overlaps are at a different spot, your file starts with different sets, and it's not able to as efficiently compress them, except down in, if you break it into really tiny chunks, and that causes a lot more overhead. But you brought up a great use case that people were talking, which was that, the CI/CD,
Oh yeah,
continuous integration and delivery workflows. Um,
that's one of
Internally
those
here at
overlooked
TrueNAS,
ones. Yeah,
yeah,
we use it extensively here. So folks know we love open source here. We run Jenkins, which is a great kind of CI/CD tool, and we're building dozens of ISOs a day usually here, right? The TrueNAS ISOs. When a patch comes in, we go do a build, we get an image. There's all these artifacts. Those are gigs and gigs and gigs of artifacts that are all 98% the same, kind of between
yeah.
revisions, right? It's like somebody makes a one line change, and guess what? We get another artifact for that one line change of code.
and
That's
and
a
then the
very
rest of your
effective. Yeah,
and then the rest of it's identical. So
100%. So there's your dedupe case right there. So if you're running any kind of CI/CD, that's a super interesting use case. And again, maybe one that gets overlooked in the real world. People don't think about it, but
yeah,
there's a
it
really good example.
and it works really well because now you're doing, file level writing. It's not trying to, dig into like a giant monolithic block file system or like a ZVol. You're writing files. ZFS knows how to deal with files. It says, I know where this one starts. Oh, this looks bit for bit identical to the other one. All right,
Yep.
put a little marker, little tally mark beside that file or that hash mark. That's a duplicate. Off you
Yeah.
go. And so, I think Allan mentioned it on the call. There was a game dev company where they were doing repackaging the game all the time, and they had, dozens and hundreds of gigs of texture and audio and other data like that. Every time they build, hey, those were all duplicated unless the artist changed them. Turn on dedupe, and all of a sudden they had a massive win. They were able to do their CI/CD pipeline on a number of solid state drives rather than saying we require the capacity of a hard disk based solution.
Yeah.
They were able to say let's use a couple of NVMe drives. All of a sudden their rebuild times are just dropping down through the floor because they're able to target NVMe instead of spinning disk. Yeah.
Well, leveraging again, that's one of those technologies that was a game changer for that use case. So
Yeah.
again, it's know your workload. Knowledge is power. The better you know what data you're going to have on the box, the wiser choices you can make to kind of give you the maximum benefit. And that's for all the features, right? Be it compression, dedupe, encryption. I mean,
How
maybe
about
leveraging
block
built-in
clone?
block cloning.
Yeah.
That's kind of the cousin of deduplication, which we should probably explain really quick for some of the new folks what the differences are between those. So I'll mention first of all, block cloning is enabled by default on TrueNAS these days. So it's one of those things that's just there. You may not know it's there, but it's doing things in the background if your application knows what it's doing. So what block cloning does is if you have an application that's aware it's about to make a copy of a file or copy data, there's different primitives that can be used in Linux or Unix, like file copy range, or if you're using SMB and you do server-side offload of copies, it's basically saying, I'm making a copy of this data server, you go copy it in the background, and then something like Samba does the actual heavy lift and says, oh, I'm just going to make a reference to this other block. I'm not going to
Yeah.
actually make a full copy of all the data.
Basically, yeah. If your client system knows it's doing a kind of, ZFS style copy on write, where it's gonna make a fresh copy and change the copy, then it can integrate really well. And it just says, hey, ZFS, could you block clone this whole file A over to file B? And ZFS can just say, sure, all right, I've done that with
Yeah, I've
block
scribbled
cloning.
some
And
metadata and I'm done. The
okay,
actual blocks didn't have to be
here's
copied.
that tally mark. It's copied. What do you need to change? And then only your changes actually have to get written to disk. Everything else is just tracked in the was it the BRT, the block redirection table, something
Yep,
like that.
yep.
Man,
No,
alphabet soup these days.
too many acronyms. But no, that's a super important thing. It's a cool technology. It's amusing when somebody stumbles across it for the first time. Like they're on a Windows system and they do a file copy and they're like, wait a minute, I only have a 1 gig network link and I'm seeing it copy at 100 gigs a second. Like, what's going on here? It's because the server's doing the copy. It's not actually going over the network, which is kind of nice. But again, it's one of those things your application has to be aware of it. You have to be able to say, I want to do the block cloning and I want to make copies of these. Dedup on the other side is when your applications are not dedup aware. You know you have a lot of blocks coming into TrueNAS, but your applications may not be able to identify which things are going to be duplicates. Now you're asking ZFS to do the heavy lifting and inspect every single block and look for matches. So that's where the extra work comes in. That's where we have to go keep track of things in tables and sort and all that good stuff. But again, between those two technologies, you have a lot of potential options and you need to pick the one that works best for you.
Exactly. That's kind of the benefit of things like this is you have lots of different opportunities, lots of different ways to solve it. Maybe you even have things that happen at a higher level in the application. Like if you're doing a hypervisor and it has the ability to say, hey, do like a snapshot. If it does its own copy on write behavior, it can sort of write a Delta file, but that's just, it's more and more different ways to solve it. Man, do a little bit of research in here. We'll try to continue to give you the information that you need to make that informed decision on which is going to be the right way to handle your data.
Excellent.
All right.
Okay.
Hey, well, we've got, we talked a little bit about this in the intro, media streaming competition in the App Store, and we're going to talk a bit about Tailscale. So a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, Chris, we were talking about various bits of drama, and one of those bits of drama was Plex doing some changes to their user agreement that people were getting a bit up in arms with. And at that point, I think we had, there were 20,000 Plex deployments and a little over 10,000 in Jellyfin. And all of a sudden now that seems to have changed. So now Jellyfin has made some major jumps and it's up in that same 20,000 active deployments count.
Jellyfin's still number 2, and I do love a good horse race. So this is an exciting one to watch. Jellyfin has jumped into that 20K active deployments camp like Plex is. So I don't know how much longer before it becomes the number 1 most deployed application on TrueNAS. But again, congrats to the Jellyfin community. It's neat to kind of see something take off like that. And another thing that's
there's a few jokes. There's a few jokes now. People are saying that the I use Jellyfin has become the I use Arch of media streaming. Well,
oh, there you go.
I use Jellyfin, by the way.
Yeah, same here.
Exactly.
Another interesting one though is we've seen Tailscale by far has become the hands down favorite of people using the app catalog and want to establish private VPN connections between their TrueNAS systems and clients. I think it's number 5 in the list most popular apps. So that's kind of cool. Keeping an eye on that. I'm always curious to hear feedback from users though on how that integration's going, if there's certain things that would be easier if we would expose on the app or not. I use it every day. That's what I'm using personally. It's perfectly fine and sufficient for my own use cases. But again, other people have more interesting esoteric use cases maybe than I do. So it's good to get that feedback if there's things we can do to show it a little love and improve it. One of the key functionalities I wanted to mention though, because I don't know if everyone is kind of taking advantage of this the way I am, is the whole exit node functionality. If you haven't gone and flipped that on your Tailscale, that's pretty cool because it lets you treat Tailscale more as a traditional like open VPN. So in other words, my phone Tailscales into my TrueNAS, but because it has exit node functionality, I can reach everything else on the network. That's just basically my VPN endpoint. But another cool thing, once you flip that on, is if you're like me and you have multiple TrueNASes, which I hope you all do, because how are you doing your backups otherwise? But that's a different discussion for a different day. Tailscale has basic high availability support for that as well, meaning I've installed Tailscale on both my TrueNASes, my primary and my backup, and if one system link goes down, which, okay, I'm installing an update on TrueNAS, rebooting, whatever, the clients automatically fall back to the other TrueNAS connection, and we'll use that as the exit route as well. So super convenient. It's one of those things you just turn it on and forget about it. It didn't really require any config. Very nice. You may want to take a look at that if you're not already leveraging that yourself. How do you do it, Chris? What are you using?
I was going to say I'm going to have to take a look at that because right now I'm doing WireGuard by hand. I have an old thin client that's passive cooled. I have a couple things like that, that are running on separate units just for that kind of purpose of if I'm updating TrueNAS, then I don't lose it. But the whole idea, like I need to look more into Tailscale evidently and say, hey, I'll put one on my TrueNAS machine as the primary and one on these little, passive cooled, always on low wattage boxes that can be my backup. But Yeah, that's an interesting setup. I do use WireGuard with that sort of exit node functionality as well.
Okay.
Whenever
Yep.
I'm, if I'm out and about traveling or somewhere where I'm on like a coffee shop or airport Wi-Fi, man, WireGuard goes on right away, and all of
Yeah.
my traffic gets tunneled right out back through home. And hey, as an advantage, I have access to my Jellyfin server from wherever I happen to be.
I did that for a long time as well, Chris, but I've gotten lazy as I've gotten older, and I just have too many things to manage. I have so many devices in this house; it's ridiculous. I had my oldest son over this last weekend. We were just counting the number of Wi-Fi devices. I pulled up my network map, and I'm like, yeah, there's like 80 devices connected just right at this moment, not counting all the other sleeping things, right? Um, it's
Yeah,
getting kind of
I'd have
ridiculous.
to take my socks off just to count the number of physical bare metal devices in my house. I have a
Oh man.
problem. The first step is admitting it. I do have a
Yeah, yeah.
problem.
No, I can admit that too. There's a lot of things, beating up the network around here. But Tailscale made it easy because I also did the first thing you're talking about here, Chris, where I had a manual WireGuard set up. I had a little thin client system that was just really low power, and it was my VPN entry point. But yeah, Tailscale was nice. You just installed the app, connect to your account, and go, and it's fast. I throw it on my wife's iPhone, kind of thing, and that way she can access like our image server for photos internally, and I don't have to expose it to the internet and open ports and all that. I've reached a point where I literally have no port forwarding rules on any of my routers. Like it's all stock, so it's
That is
quite
that is pretty
nice.
fantastic. It makes it
Yeah.
easy to switch. But hey, you mentioned Immich that there. Let's talk about that real quickly
Oh
because we
yeah.
noticed a bit of discussion this week. There was a change to the Immich app, basically to the storage layout of it, and this is
Mhm.
actually a change that was proposed, I believe, by the original coder of Immich himself. He suggested that we should consolidate a couple of different data sets because of the way that the Docker overlay file system and the mounts work. It was basically causing some unintended, double writing, write amplification
Oh,
behavior
okay.
when you were doing uploads. So he did suggest a change, and I know there's been some feedback and some concerns, but I did notice our community seems to have stepped up to say, here's an easy way you can migrate everything over. Again, I'll try to drop some links to that in the description for some of the guides I've seen on migrating your Immich storage configuration. But as it is, I have yet to do that myself, but it looks like it's fairly simple to do. There is an additional way that needs to be done if you want to put like your thumbnails on a solid state drive, as I know a lot of people do for that speed of loading. But we'll make sure that it gets well documented, and then hey, that can maybe go over into the reference over at apps.truenas.com under Immich that talks about it, where you say, hey, if you've got this notice that says you're still using the legacy storage and you want to move to the new one for improved stability, speed, all those good things, check out this resource below. Again, that's one of the fantastic things that we're enabling with that new, apps catalog and the apps
Yeah.
marketplace on the web.
I guess I'm gonna have to go follow that because I think I was one of the original image testers when we first rolled the app into the app catalog. That was one of the first ones I adopted. So I'm gonna have to go do
Let's
that. I haven't been keeping up with what the latest hotness is on how to arrange the storage.
It's now to the point where Immich is my primary, and Google Photos is just sort of the secondary backup for my most recent things because they can sit there. They're also getting synced back to Immich. Getting unplugged from the cloud more and more. There's
Yeah.
probably we could do a whole bunch of discussions on that. Just interesting little news tidbits of where the clouds bit some people. I'm pretty sure I saw something about I think it was the U.S. Navy had a bunch of ovens go down because they weren't allowed to maintain them. I don't know if that was a
Hmm.
cloud related thing or just an open source related thing, some
Oh,
sort of
that's wild.
contract. But
Well, I
right,
will say,
right to repair and all those things. I'm a big fan of that. And again, you keep trying to get me to jump to the Linux world fully, and so as soon as Gabe Newell makes that VR headset, I'm moving my gaming desktop over to Linux.
right? It's
Well,
gonna happen. This will be the
it's
year.
gonna
Maybe
happen. It's
next
gonna
year.
happen.
It'll
Just
happen.
just don't count past two, folks. Okay, don't
Wow.
jinx me. And
Hey, Immich is like by far my favorite app that I run on TrueNAS. We have a lot of family photos from over 20 years of children, all that, like gobs of photos that we never delete and have to keep, which I get. But Immich made that possible because I just storing them all in the cloud would have been a nightmare and all the costs. It's a lot of data. But another app I'm going to give a shout out to is Jelu, Gelu. Jelu. It's a book indexing tool. So, and by book, I mean not your ebooks that you've, pulled off of Kindle or other things. I mean like your actual physical, I have paper in my house kind of book copies. So I'm a bit of a book nerd. My wife's a book nerd as well. I think we're legally classified as a library in all 50 states at this point because we have so many books in our house.
I'm going to ship you a box of those old index cards with the Dewey Decimal System now,
No, no, no,
Kris.
no. I need to be a little bit more modern than that. But this app is amazing. It's one of the ones I helped port over to TrueNAS because I wanted it. I was like, I need this. But it's really nice. It's got a good mobile app. You can go and just scan the barcode of your books on the back, and it tosses it in your catalog and your index. Because we're in that situation where we go to the bookstore, and sometimes I may accidentally rebuy the same book because I forget I already have that one on the shelf. This is fantastic because now I can just quickly, oh, yep, I got that one. It's on the shelf. Oh, it's on this shelf in this place of the house. Blah blah blah. I can go find it now. So another fantastic one if you're a book nerd like we are.
More and more fantastic things that we're just learning about, every day we're going, wow, there is in fact an app for that. Well,
Yep.
thanks for the additional bits of trivia there, Kris. I did not know that you actually had that many books. You gotta try and do a couple shots. Maybe we can slide them into the show at some
I
point.
need to show them in the future. I'm actually one of my home projects is building like a dark academia Gothic library downstairs in the basement right now. So we got all the flooring in. I'm actually building bookshelves now. So that's
There
the
you go.
next thing. So ask me in 6 months. I'll see if I can get some pictures, see what it turned out look like.
All right, so you guys in the comment section, make sure you ask Kris in 6 months how his library's going. But
All right, keep me
all right.
motivated. I got to finish it.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thanks to everybody for tuning in again. That's our show for this week. We'll be back again next week with another episode of TrueNAS Tech Talk. As always, thanks for tuning in. Please feel free to submit your questions, whether it's about virtualization, about fast dedupe, or anything else, to t3@truenas.com. Please do, again, those usual YouTube things. Drop a message in the comment section below. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell, so you'll be able to stay on top of the latest TrueNAS and tech topics. We'll see you next time.